Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. We're slowly waiting for people to join, but as we do, I'll just give a little spiel and introduction so that we can leave as much time for this important talk as we can. My name is Courtney Doggart. I'm the president of Network 2020. We're a New York-based nonprofit that really works to create more informed conversations around what's happening around the world. So. Before I begin, I just wanted to say to all those who are joining from Lebanon or with loved ones in Lebanon, I just want to say I'm terribly sorry. The world has been going through a lot of upheaval in general, and it seems like those of you in Lebanon have been having an especially hard time recently. So just wanted to express my condolences for the really terrific, horrific blast recently. So we're very pleased to have Mr. Nadim Shehadi with us today. He is the executive director of the Lebanese American University of the New York headquarters and academic center. And he is also an associate fellow of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House in London. He was previously the director of the Eastern Mediterranean Studies Center at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and he was also a senior member of St. Antony's College, Oxford, where he directed the Center for Lebanese Studies from 1986 to 2005. He trained as an economist with an interest in the history of economic thought and has produced several publications, contributes regularly to media coverage of Middle Eastern affairs, and has advised several governments and international organizations. So with that, we're going to kick off the conversation with a lot of what has been happening recently. So as everyone here knows, there is quite a bit that's been happening in Lebanon. The Special Tribunal just issued a verdict 2 days ago. There is revolution, bankruptcy, and the early August nuclear bomb style explosion. So just a really horrific incident. So just, would you mind just taking a moment to put all of this in context for us? You know, in particular, I think the dominant narrative has been around the tragic explosion in Beirut and the economic collapse. But is that the result of corruption of the political establishment and a culture of negligence? Is that a reasonable assessment, as some have been saying? And how can we understand this governmental paralysis in the broader context of the political and economic crises that have been taking place in Lebanon this past year?
Thank you, Courtney. I'm also a member of Network 2020.
We are very pleased, and you always ask excellent questions. So,
yes, we have gone through a lot in Lebanon, and justifiably, the anger is directed towards the government and towards the whole political class, and towards the corruption, the perceived corruption of the political class. And also there are calls for the whole political class to resign, for parliament to resign, for government to resign. Now, this is emotional and justifiable because of the immense anger that people are going through. But I think it's a dangerous path. It's a path that we've seen globally of people revolting against the political establishments, and the result is always populist leaders, you know, like in Mexico, in Brazil, in Hungary, India. Drain the swamp can lead to this. So I think it's important to preserve the political process, even though they are, I mean, I'm not defending politicians. All politicians are corrupt, except those in Washington and except the Vatican, of course. But there is more to that in Lebanon. There is a reason for the rot, and it's a bit of a complex story. So my colleague has helped me by putting a timeline. You should not be reading my emails. Okay. So basically, we've had this. This is I've taken this from a random report which is basically the narrative that the explosion is because of the pervasive culture of negligence, corruption, complacency of the ruling class. It's responsible for. So that's for everything. That's the common narrative. And this is the timeline. I want to review what happened in the last 15 years because we've now reached the result of this special tribunal for Lebanon, which in a way judges the bomb, the assassination of former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, which was in February 2005. Now, the story begins slightly earlier. It begins with the invasion of Iraq, if you like. It begins with a Franco-American discontent, a Franco-American crisis where, God forgive you, in New York, you were throwing French wine down the drain and eating eating freedom fries. And then there was...
Not everyone.
Then there was a crucial meeting on the 5th of June 2004 between George Bush and Jacques Chirac, where they had a reconciliation. So basically, Jacques Chirac told GW, maybe this idea of democratization you have is not so bad. Maybe we should pursue it. But why not Lebanon? You've handed over Lebanon to the Syrians in 1990, and look what a mess it is. People are unhappy. The Prime Minister Hariri is my friend, and I know the cost of the Syrian occupation, whatever. So they came up with an agreement to launch UN Security Council Resolution 1559. So basically what we're talking about is a story of 3 bombs. You have one bomb, which is the Marine Barracks. The Marine Barracks is this one, which is in 1983. The US redeploys after the Marine Barracks and then gradually hands over the country to Syria, weaned by basically by Syrian manipulation through the hostage crisis. They kidnap people in Beirut and they release them in Damascus, and the Reagan administration has to say thank you every time. And then they start thinking of Assad as the problem solver in Lebanon. So the country was handed over, and this had a huge impact on the system in Lebanon. We started getting a much larger army, much larger security services, much less freedom, lots of corruption, and that was the source of the discontent with the Syrians. Now, so after the Chirac GW meeting comes the assassination of Hariri, because the Syrians and Hezbollah realized that Hariri is responsible for this, and they're fighting back. So what now we know for sure from the tribunal's judgment 2 days ago, that they are responsible for the assassination of Hariri. So you have here a period of political assassinations that goes for about 8 or 9 years, with lots of people being assassinated, from members of parliament to journalists, former ministers, officers who were part of the investigation, journalists, the last one to be assassinated, the last assassination was Mohammed Shattah, who was also vocal about Hezbollah, but who was also mediating with Hezbollah. So here we go. This is our timeline. You have the Hariri assassination. You have lots of unrest because of political assassinations. You have Hezbollah and allies paralyzing the country for 19 months from July, from November 2006 to May 2008. You have the Hezbollah-Israel war. You have an attack on the city of Beirut by Hezbollah when the government tried to remove one officer from the airport. Hezbollah controls the airport and a large part of the port, and no one can touch them. And that's now being investigated in view of the bomb in the port. Then you have the launch of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. The Special Tribunal for Lebanon was initiated in 2007 and officially launched in 2009. It started its actual judgment, the actual trials in 2014. And before every step, there was upheaval, a war, a paralysis of government. You know, there was a paralysis of government here from April 2014 to October 2016. 29 months of paralysis, power vacuum, no president, no government, no effective government, no elections. We were totally at the mercy of basically Hezbollah paralyzing the country. Now, how does it do that? It does it through an agreement reached in Doha in 2008 after it attacked the city, which gave it a veto power over the government and over any decision in the country. So that's basically a picture of the unrest. And on top of that, you have, because they were gradually taking over the country, because they were threatening tourists that were coming from the Gulf because of their anti-Saudi, anti-GCC politics. They even kidnapped some of them. We had an alienation from the GCC. This is a major blow to the economy because there are 350,000 Lebanese who work in the GCC countries in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, and all that. 40% of the remittances, 40% of the deposits in the bank come from GCC countries. Most of the investment comes from the GCC. The tourist season relies on the GCC. So when we got cut off from the GCC, it was like, if you like, it was like Brexit on steroids for us. It was a total collapse of the economy, and I mean, we can go into the details of that. So this is basically what Lebanon has been going through: the paralysis, the rot that has, the corruption is part of it, and we don't know how it resulted yet in an explosion like the one we saw in the port. There, we have to wait for the investigation, but basically this is the context. It goes a bit beyond just a pure corrupt establishment.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Nadim, very much for this helpful timeline. I think it's really important, I think, to be able to go back and see that this is a crisis that has much deeper roots. I'd like to just return to the present just for a minute, and talk about, one of the points, you had mentioned that that the government has resigned. And so just curious to get your take on this. And you alluded to it a little bit, but I'd love for you to expand on it. Whether or not is this mass resignation, is it a sign of accountability? Is it avoiding responsibility? Or like, where do you think that process will lead to, especially in the context of this larger timeline that you put forth?
So this government that just resigned was formed after the revolution of last October. It is a government of one color. It is a Hezbollah government and its allies. I was very much in favor of having them in the government because this constitutes a break from governments of national unity that were imposed on us in 2008 in Doha. When you have a government of national unity, you have absolutely no responsibility, you have complete paralysis. You have ministers who basically block each other and blame each other, and nobody's responsible. It's like having Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders sharing power. They will each blame, they will blame each other, and there's no accountability. And that was, in my view, part of the rot. So we were held hostage by governments of national unity. The paralysis was created until we compromised, and it was compromise after compromise after compromise until the final compromise was the election of General Aoun, which gave Hezbollah complete control of parliament and the government. And so I want them to be in power. I want them to be, instead of being in power and being protected by national unity and having Hariri as Prime Minister, I want them to be responsible, to be accountable, and to restore the electoral process, and for the to have the elections decide where to go from here. You cannot revive the country without reviving the political system, which has been rotten by the paralysis, and reviving the banking system. The government of Hezbollah were against any negotiations with the IMF. They were stalling. They were basically, Hezbollah declared openly that it was against it, that the country doesn't need the IMF, doesn't need Europe, doesn't need the United States, doesn't need the GCC. We can have partnerships with Iran, with Syria, North Korea, Venezuela, and China. Yeah. So if you like, it's a tug of war trying to pull us to that side of the world. Let them expose themselves and let's have an election. They can't do. Now by forcing them to resign or by them responding to the resignation demand, they have the paralysis without being responsible for it. So the bottom line is that there is something dysfunctional in our system because it is a system that works by consensus. Mm-hmm. It is a system which through which we in a way reach compromises, but there is no protection for one party playing against the rules. And the rules include assassinations, provoking wars. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it sounds as though your initial thinking was, this is, in many ways, it was good that this government came to power to kind of break that deadlock that had existed for so long. But in some ways, they squandered that opportunity. And now you're in a crisis again, and there's not going to be accountability for this current government. And sounds like there's going to be, in your estimation, a lot of paralysis in the recovery process. So how do you think these pieces get put back together now?
So we're going into a period of paralysis, which will include going through. For us to function again, we need this caretaker government to be in place without any responsibility until a new government is formed, whose sole object will be to conduct new elections. So we have to wait for, the parliament will have to vote a new electoral law. We'll have to have the elections, then we'll have to have another horse trading period to form another government, and then we will be effective. We will have some form of effective government. And
So it sounds like this could be quite a long, drawn-out process, and one where there are many points of potential destabilization, judging based on the history.
So the country is, by default, still hostage to the paralysis, and the paralysis plays in the hands of the hostage taker, if you like.
Well, not a rosy scenario, I suppose, by any means. And I'm sorry to hear that. I do hope that there might be some way out of that. I'd like to return to what happened a couple of days ago, which is also one of the reasons for having this talk now too, which is the verdict of the Special Tribunal. Could you talk a little bit about the verdict as you see it and what the implications are?
Okay, now the verdict is probably the best outcome we could have expected. When people went to the street in 2005, they demanded an international investigation and international tribunal. That was in a way because they knew who had committed the murder. They knew that half the country, that we're split, we are polarized. Half the country is with it, and they wanted an external force to come and say it, rather than take justice in our own hands. So they wanted, it's in a way the avoidance of civil war.
Mm-hmm. Well, the messenger is an important piece.
Yeah, the messenger, and in order to avoid civil war, because the Syrians were occupying the country with the blessing of the international community by saying that, well, you know, these unruly Lebanese, if we leave them to their own devices, or if we give them some freedom, they'll start killing each other. And people believed it. So the last thing the Lebanese wanted to do was to start fighting to kick the Syrians out, because that would strengthen Syrian presence. Now, what we had on Tuesday was the truth. So we've had a judgment which, with a verdict against one person. Now, a lot of people are very dissatisfied with the verdict, and that this one person is just a small instrument. He's not but the link between that person and the other four, the link between the other four and Hezbollah as an organization, and Iran, and the Syrian regime is very solid in the report. So you have a report of 149 pages that links every section to another report. That's the summary, to a 2,600 page full report. And the 2,600 page full report refers to roughly 157,000 pages of transcripts of trials and investigations and documents. So you cannot have more scrutinized facts than that. And what satisfies a tribunal which judges individuals according to best practices and without reasonable doubt is very different from what satisfies a historian or a political scientist or an investigative journalist. This is far more facts than any historian ever uses, or any political decision ever uses. So it's a very valuable output. It is, in a way, the truth that the street demanded, but it is not justice, and it's not accountability. This is a first step towards justice and accountability. Now that we know the party, it could lead to an internal reconciliation in Lebanon, or it could lead to civil war. We hope that it will lead to more international involvement and sympathy, because the Lebanese system is based on having international protection. It's like Kuwait. I mean, Kuwait cannot exist as a state if there isn't a regional order that protects it. When the American ambassador blinked in 1990, Kuwait was gone in 3 days. So the Lebanese system was based on having a very small army, but a very intensive and strong diplomatic engagement, mainly with the West, to keep it neutral in the region and keep it free.
You're actually taking this in a direction that I wanted to go for my last question before we start to open it up for Q&A, because there are a lot of questions coming in. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the regional implications you've mentioned. You've obviously been mentioning Syria and Iran quite a bit. Where does this uncertain space that you're now in with the caretaker government and the need to go through this process of basically negotiating a new formation of a new government, where does that leave Lebanon and where does that leave the wider region? Because obviously, as you mentioned with Kuwait, Lebanon is can often be used as a pawn, and so how does that play out in the region?
Okay, I can summarize a very complex story in the region in one sentence, which is that there are 2 agendas battling. One is for peace, and one is for perpetual war. The perpetual war agenda is run by the axis of resistance that refuses any peace dealings with Israel, and that has militias in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and I'm talking about the Islamic Revolutionary Guards of Iran and its alliance with the Syrian regime, Hamas and Hezbollah and the other militias. And you have the other side, which is the GCC countries and the countries that have made peace with Israel and that are the anti-Iranian camp. I think what happened recently between the UAE and Israel is a huge step towards peace in the region. This is the way to go. It's like if you want to eradicate the drug cartels in Latin America. It's a very complex operation because they are entrenched in the population. There's codependency, there's violence. But if you legalize heroin, if you legalize cocaine, if you legalize drugs, you basically pull the carpet from under their feet. And I think a region going towards peace instead of war is a solution. It's not only Lebanon, it's not only Palestine, it's Syria, it's Iraq. The revolt in Lebanon is very similar to the revolt in Iraq. It's very similar to the revolt in Iran itself. People in Iran are revolting against the institutions of the Revolutionary Guards that control the country and that are not the elected government. So that's in a nutshell, if you
Mhm.
like. There's a lot of details in the middle.
Right. Yes. Well, and it sounds like a lot of fodder for another talk, looking more specifically at Iran. In the meantime, though, I wanted to turn to the Q&A box because there are a lot of questions coming in. And just a reminder to everyone listening, if you would like to put in a question, please do. You can add them to the Q&A box. So I wanted to just jump off on this point because there are a lot of questions about Hezbollah and whether or not there is an opportunity for a Lebanon that's free from the influence of Hezbollah and how that might come about. So this is a combination of several questions because I see that coming up several times. And also, is there a way to get rid of some of the arms as well?
Rely on you for the questions because I couldn't. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Rely on me for the questions. I'll ask them. And right now, I'm grouping several of them that are really looking at at whether or not there's a future for Lebanon without the influence of Hezbollah directly or the arms.
Yes, I mean, one has to hope that there is. If there isn't, we will be moving towards becoming another Gaza, because an organization like Hezbollah flourishes in a Gaza scenario and is pulling us towards becoming another Gaza. In a way, Hamas holds the population in Gaza hostage in the same way as Hezbollah is holding us hostage. Of course, Israel contributes in empowering both because it gives them the legitimacy. But the Lebanese system of power sharing, of ensuring that no single party or group can have full hegemony, this was the original intention, of that guarantees freedom and political freedom specifically, the only place, and that has a functioning democracy is what needs to be revived. It's a system that has attracted the whole elite of the region. So, you know, we are in New York. Imagine the power of New York is that all the talents of the world, from Kansas to Kuala Lumpur to Kenya to wherever, come here. New York is a filter of the most talented people in finance, in art, in anything. Yeah. And Beirut used to be that for the region. Beirut in the 30s attracted people from Turkey, the 20s and 30s. In 48, we had the Palestinians who contributed a huge amount to the economy. In 52, we have the Egyptian elite, a financial elite that have experience on the scale of the Suez Canal for 100 years, and very sophisticated people from Alexandria of Darul. We have the merchants of Aleppo, of Damascus, of Mosul, you know, on the trade route to India. All these people were displaced because of tyrannical regimes gradually taking over the region. And the system in Lebanon was the only free area that accommodated them. And that's what created our prosperity, and it's the diversity and the freedom and the relative neutrality guaranteed by the international community.
I'm going to, that actually leads well to a question from Henning Hegland, and that's, would Lebanon survive an open democracy, the one that's not trying to create an even split between Sunni, Shia, Christian, et cetera, and what are the alternatives?
It is an open democracy.
But one that's less structured, let's say.
You know, I mean, he doesn't, it's not explained probably. It's
Yeah.
probably a secular one man, one vote, like Turkey, or so. The system of one man, one vote, which disregards any diversity in the society, is adopted in the region, in a place like Turkey, where they got rid of the Armenians, of the Greeks, suppressed the Kurds and the Arabs, forced an identity, forced a language, and restricted freedom for 50 years. And hey, you have secularism, which the world admires. And Lebanon chose a different path. I mean, this path was chosen by the Arab nationalists. I mean, Egypt is also a so-called secular nationalist country, but the result was expelling everybody in Alexandria who didn't fit. I mean, there were Greeks in Alexandria, in Egypt, probably since the days of Alexander the Great, and they were expelled because they did not fit in the homogenized Arab nationalist identity that Arab nationalism and Abdel Nasser created. So these people were, their properties were confiscated and they were expelled, and a lot of them came to Lebanon. Some went to Greece and came back from Greece to Lebanon because they are used to a diverse society, to a cosmopolitan atmosphere. They feel claustrophobic if they live in Wyoming or places like. So that's I think that there is a lot of the system in Lebanon is different. It has a lot of credit. There's a lot of credit. People are not naturally dissatisfied with it. The system has basically failed. But the question is, the chicken and egg question is, has it failed because it is a rotten system? Or has it failed because there's no system that can survive in circumstances that we are? I mean, we have, the whole region has failed because of that dichotomy that is creating this perpetual war in the region. Iraq, Syria, Yemen, everywhere.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I mean, it sounds like a challenge to try to maintain that diversity.
It's the story of a huge debate within Lebanon, which.
Yeah, I'm going to shift it a little bit away from complete politics to looking at the economic side. So you said that we cannot revive the country without reviving the political and banking system. So this is a question from Sienna Ross. What would a successful and, more importantly, realistic banking system revival look like?
Okay. Now, to summarize it in a cliche, whenever there is a crisis, there is a choice between blaming politics versus finance. It's either the banker's fault or it's the politician's fault. 2008 was either because the bankers are corrupt or because the politicians gave free loans. You know, we have a similar debate. I'm on the side of the bankers, not on the side of the politicians, because the Lebanese banking system is a distillation of several centuries of financial and trade expertise from the whole region. You have all the trading families from Egypt, Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, ended up in Lebanon, and their international contacts in the Gulf, in the Far East, in Latin America. This is our banking system. It's not just a Lebanese banking system, it's a distillation of the regional finance. I trust them far more than I trust politicians in a way. And they were, what happened was there was a pact in the time of Hariri the father. Hariri the father brought the big bankers into a room and he said, the country will not revive if we don't borrow money because there's no aid coming. So he made a pact that they would all participate in funding the government, in lending money to the government. And there was in the pact that no one can leave. There's no bailouts. So it was, if you like, an amazing example of public sector and private sector collaboration. This collapsed after the death of Hariri, and because the government became unsustainable with all the pressures from the crisis that I showed you. I mean, I could show you a graph. I don't have it now, but I could send it to anyone who's interested. That shows the correlation between the economic crisis and the political crisis, mainly with the Gulf. So we are, in a way, an oil economy because we depend so much on the Gulf now that we are. So the banking sector needs to be revived because you cannot revive a country without people having money. I mean, people being able to use money, and you need to revive the democratic system. You need to revive political freedom, and that's what makes Lebanon. Otherwise, we are Gaza.
Mm-hmm. All right. So in terms of, oh, sorry. in terms of political and humanitarian recovery, Joanna G, and I apologize, Joanna, I'm not going to attempt to read your long last name right now, is what specific constructive roles can France or the United States play in helping Lebanon, both politically and in humanitarian terms? Macron pledged to help, but what could France do in the short term to make a significant difference?
Yes, I mean, you know, what's happened now is so huge. I mean, the last explosion on its own is a catastrophe. Even and the corona crisis is a catastrophe. The political crisis is a catastrophe. I think Lebanon needs to regain confidence in its viability. At the moment, the country has been, in a way, written off. The political system is written off. The economy is written off. The country has been written off because it's not viable. And there is one thing that will regain the confidence in Lebanon, which is an international environment that gives it protection, or at least an international environment that doesn't seem to be giving it away to Iran or giving the whole region away to Iran. I mean, we're not going to discuss American politics, I hope, but it is an important factor. So that's the short answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Terrific. And thank you. And perhaps at some time we can or should discuss American politics, but maybe we can revisit that in a few months. So this next question that I want to turn to is from Rula El Rafai, and it's I want to know, and Nadim, how can we get to a non-sectarian system and a state-building agenda, and are the two linked?
Well, I don't believe in it. First of all, we do not have a sectarian system. We have a power-sharing system which recognizes diversity and gives every diverse group rights and does a separation of church and state. Basically, we are the only true liberal system, because in a secular system is the hegemony of the state over the church. We have too many churches to be hegemonic over. So we have every religious group has the freedom to apply their own canon, like for personal status, like marriage, divorce, child custody. A friend of mine puts it in a very correct way. She says, yes, every group has the right to oppress their women in their own way, and it's true. I think there is a lot that is wrong in canon law and in religious laws, but I think they should be reformed. I don't think I think suppressing religious beliefs leads to extremism. And we don't have that extremism in Lebanon because of the freedom that religions have. Um, and that's, I mean, this is a long conversation with Rula.
All right, excellent. Well, we can have you back as a panel discussion. We do have a couple of questions coming in about the role of Palestinian refugees. So, and I'm going to try to combine these as best I can. So one is looking at the role and impact of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon's relationship with Israel and Iran, and whether they would be granted full citizenship or would Lebanon support right of return. And then the other is looking at it from whether or not Palestinian refugees are being used as a bargaining chip by the Lebanese political elite when it comes to seeking international monetary aid. So in other words, is the Western world paying the Lebanese political elite to keep the Palestinian refugees and prevent them from returning to what is now Israel in exchange for monetary compensation? So, so thank you to Ali Aoun and Henning Hegland for those questions.
Right. I mean, if the world would pay us for the Palestinian refugees, we would sell them at this stage. But I don't think the world is paying anyone anything to keep the Palestinian refugees. Palestinian refugees have been in Lebanon for 4 generations. They should benefit from all civil rights. It's very unjust the way that our laws treat them. And basically we cannot but support their right of return because that's what they want. But we have to also recognize that while they're in our country, especially that some were born and their parents were born there, they're Lebanese. I mean, there's no difference. Now, this is a very controversial statement in Lebanese terms because we basically had a civil war about the Palestinian principle. Right. Our civil war in 1974-75 was because half the country wanted to join Syria, Egypt, and the rest of the Arab world in fighting Israel, and wanted to give the Palestinians the right to fight and conduct operations from Lebanon and give them the right to bear arms and autonomy and all that. And the other half was against it. As usual, there was a compromise. The compromise allowed them to do that. And of course, we paid the price.
All right. Yes. Sometimes compromises don't quite do what we want them to do. We have a couple of questions now that's looking at the role of diaspora and expats. So one is, what role, if any, do you see the Lebanese diaspora playing in charting Lebanon's path forward? And how will Lebanon cope with the ongoing brain drain? And what can the expat community do to help? So thank you, Madeleine McClintock and Jean Abinader for that. And apologies for any name butcherings.
Yes, hi. Greetings, Madeleine and John. Well, I mean, the Lebanon has benefited from brain drain more than it's lost from brain drain historically, because we have benefited from the brain drain of the whole region. We have benefited from, I mean, the whole music industry and art in Lebanon is, without the Armenians, it wouldn't exist. It's so the Armenians, the Palestinians, the Syrians, the Aleppan cuisine, Aleppan joie de vivre and soirees is Beirut is that, has adopted that. So we have benefited from brain drain. The brain drain that we are experiencing because of the war is very harmful, but it is normal. People don't want, I mean, Prince Hassan of Jordan used to say, brain drain is better than brain in the drain. We shouldn't restrict people from leaving and seeking a better life, and they should have the freedom to come back or not come back. This is a fluid world, you know, and people do maintain connections with their country. They contribute to it. Now, having said that, the Lebanese diaspora has suffered a lot from the financial crisis because a lot of them have their money in the Lebanese banks. But we've also seen at the same time how the diaspora has risen to help the country. I think if you restore the political system, political freedom, and the banking system in Lebanon, the diaspora and Lebanon's friends in the Gulf and internationally are very capable of reviving the country.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let me see, we have time for a couple of more questions, I think. So let me see, there are so many, so I apologize in advance to everyone that we can't get to. One question from Jodor Jalit is, given that disarmament of Hezbollah is anchored on the idea of a modern state with monopoly over violence, is the integration of Hezbollah's militia into the Lebanese armed forces an option? Like, for example, the incorporation of the PMF into the Iraqi armed forces, or is there another alternative?
Yes, I think this is a very important question from Khadr. He's in Argentina, by the way. And it's very relevant because we cannot disarm Hezbollah through war. We don't want a civil war to disarm Hezbollah. If Israel attacks, it will strengthen Hezbollah rather than disarm it. And Israel has contributed to maintaining Hezbollah's legitimacy indirectly by maintaining the threat of war and maintaining the credibility of Hezbollah to its constituency that it protects them from Israeli attack. I think what is needed is a political solution where the constituency of Hezbollah themselves are gradually realizing, and I have confidence in them, that Hezbollah is not the right party for them, that they are captive to Hezbollah through an electoral law that doesn't give them choice, and that they are Lebanese like everyone else. I mean, we're talking about the Shias of Lebanon, who are the most diverse politically of the communities. I mean, historically, they are the founders of the Communist Party, of the SSNP. Some of them were Baathists, some of them were socialists. There's a huge political diversity. Hezbollah came in and did a little bit like the Iranian militias are doing in Basra now. They eradicated everybody else and established hegemony. So I think we should politically liberate them from that, and they are capable of doing it themselves. There is a lot, I mean, of discontent with the way Hezbollah has participated in the war in Syria and in Yemen and in Iraq, and they don't identify with it. I think this is the only. I don't think that incorporating them in the army is a solution. In fact, I am not for a strong army. A strong army is the biggest threat to freedom anywhere, including here. and it's very costly. We have better things to do with money, and to maintain a strong army is not only is economically, you need a different economic system, a different political system, and I think the whole region should, if the whole region is moving towards peace, and there we go again to the broader regional picture, nobody needs a strong army.
Okay, so turning now I'm going to combine a couple of questions, and this is about the way forward economically again. So one question from Miriam Al-Khoury is, would you say resolving the political crisis in Lebanon will resolve its economic and financial crisis, or are there ways to a stable economy without resorting to an upheaval in the political system? And following that, we have from Danny Mina, can the introduction of a new currency, similar to what the Turks did, help solve the financial crunch in Lebanon?
Quick answer to Danny Mina, yes. I think an electronic currency that allows us to use the funds stuck in the banks would help revive the economy. Would help revive the economy. In fact, I don't think Lebanon needs a currency at all, but that's a different debate. I mean, politics and the economy are always interlinked because you need politicians with a vision to drive the economy to prosperity. If you have, we are divided between politicians who want to turn us into a citadel to fight perpetual wars against everybody, and to be isolated and from the world, basically. And we have politicians who want peace, who want to make Lebanon neutral in the regional power struggles, who will join peace with Israel once the rest of the Arabs do. This is the official. Lebanon will not do a separate deal with Israel because that contradicts our the spirit of consensus in the country. But we don't have to be hijacked by a militia that controls whether we have war or not. So you need the politicians with the right vision for the economy to prosper, and Lebanon prospers when it has freedom, when it's an open society, and when it has democracy, and it doesn't when we have a strong army that shuts us down.
All right. Good thoughts. So just jumping off that in our final minutes, the way forward, how do you get to that Lebanon that is open, that has democracy, that is all those things that you just said? If you could be advising any sort of government or people in power right now, how would you create that vision going forward? Or if not, what's the what path forward do you see?
Well, the first step should be political. The first step should be restoring the political process, restoring confidence in the political process, and we need elections for that. I think Lebanon financially, Lebanon can be revived with in a package which is not that big. It's restoring confidence is a huge challenge, but the financial element can be resolved very easily, and if the country is on the right path. So restoring confidence through international support, through reassuring people that they are not being hijacked towards Gaza, becoming another Gaza. Sorry to repeat that, and I apologize to Gaza again. But I think the formula is, I'm making it sound easy. It's a big challenge, but that's the way to go. That's the way.
All right. Well, Nadim, thank you very much. I hope that does come to pass, because I think we would all benefit from a stable Lebanon, and I hope that is eventually what emerges from what has been, I think, a very difficult time. So thank you, Nadim, for joining us. Thank you, everyone who participated in the call and asked really excellent questions. There are so many and I couldn't get to them all. And I just wish that I had the opportunity to. Just as a note for everyone listening, we will be taking a short break for a couple of weeks at the end of the summer as we get our fall lineup ready. But please do check back in because we have a couple good events already lined up. So on September 12th, which is a Saturday, we have an excellent panel that's going to be talking about how to pay for COVID-19 and looking at international tax reform as a possible solution for a socially just economic recovery. And so we have Jose Ocampo, who will be speaking on that panel. He's the former Minister of Finance of Colombia and the former Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs at the UN. We have Irene Ovonje Adida, who is a Ugandan lawyer, politician, and human rights activist, and Krishan Mehta, who is a former partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers and currently the Senior Global Justice Fellow at Yale University. So that's going to be an excellent panel. That's on a Saturday at 10:30 a.m. And then on September 21st at 12 p.m., we have Joseph Nye from Harvard, who will be talking about Do Morals Matter in Foreign Policy. So we have a good lineup. We'll be adding more. I hope you all join us. And in the meantime, thank you very much, Nadim, and to all who participated today. All right, take care. Bye-bye.